So somebody asked me to kind of discuss my, my philosophical development. What where I've been, or like what I've, basically my philosophical development in that since I've learned philosophy and discussed philosophy, what things have been my, what stances in philosophy have I been on, and how have I developed in that way. Um, in 2009, I took my first intro to philosophy class, and since then I taken ever since I quit college, like about a year and a half ago. Um, I took every single college class in philosophy, every single advanced philosophy class that I could find, and it's honestly I've gone from where I first was kind of a well, first off, in ethics, I kind of learned the whole Kantian and deontological ethical thing, and I was, if you go back to like 2010, 2011, you'll see my videos arguing a deontology for ethics, or possibly sometimes a Kantianism, because I was kind of had some sort of disdain for consequentialist ethics, and I still kind of do. So I did kind of agree that there was some kind of metaphysical element in ethics where there's always a sense of good or right that goes beyond what you think or see, or it goes beyond instrumental things, but it's more intrinsic. So I did think that when it comes to ethics, but when it comes to like metaphysical things, I was kind of, like a rationalist. Like in modern philosophy, you have the rationalists and you have the empiricists. I was more like a rationalist. I read every metaphysics. I read every single metaphysics article I can get my hands on. Lately, I've been not too big into like straight metaphysics. I've been big into epistemology and philosophy of science, but not really metaphysics anymore. I still have a few good books on metaphysics. I have one anthology and like a few other books about it, but it's not really a huge thing. I feel like I've read a lot of almost everything I could find on metaphysics when I was really into that. And I do plan on doing like one of my intensive courses on metaphysics, but I'm not sure about that since I haven't really read it for a while. So it'd be a while before I did that. So I kind of agreed with there being abstract and concrete entities. I agreed that there were universals. I agreed, and for a while I had like I wrote a paper about tropes for a while, and I kind of was really big into thinking about tropes in metaphysics. One of my teachers was a guy named Paul Audi, who he's a metaphysics professor at University of Rochester right now, but at a point he was a metaphysics professor at UNO, or University of Nebraska Omaha, which is where I went to school. So I read a lot of his articles, and I read a lot of other articles, like people like ones by Chris Daly, and a lot of stuff like that. So I did kind of. It was until I took a class with the epistemology professor at that university. So I was really big into metaphysics for like a year or so. I don't think I did too many videos on metaphysics back in like 2010, 2011 when I first started this channel. But I was really big into it. I loved it, and it kind of like made me look at things differently, and I just loved metaphysics. I loved it, period. And then I took a class which was called Theory of Knowledge, which is about epistemology. Now, because of that professor, I've really been big into I've really been big into epistemology and philosophy of science. So I'll get to why I'm big into philosophy of science in a second. Um, so this guy was named William Melanson, and he kind of has this like funny little. He had this funny little war with Paul Audi, the metaphysics professor, and he kind of thought that everything that Dr. Audi talked about was just stupid, and how straight metaphysics is just sort of dumb, and we can't really talk about that stuff. And he thought that epistemology is the only way that we talking about things in some sort of epistemological point of view is the only way we can we go about thinking about things. So when I first took that course, I was kind of mad at Dr. Lance. I was like, how can you say that about my metaphysics? So I kind of had a blog which was at a point I called it Metaphysics Advocate, because I was kind of wanting to argue that more. That was back in like 2011 or so, 2010, I think. So I did that, and then I didn't really understand epistemology for a little while, but then I kind of then I sort of did. I kind of came into it, and I sort of understood it. And then it was at that point that I kind of lost my interest for metaphysics, because I thought that, and I kind of switched from the whole rationalist thing to the more empiricist thing, because I kind of finally agreed with the whole idea that the only way that we can philosophize or do science is by what we experience, or what we perceive. I'm sorry, it's by that only, and we can't really do anything from anything else. We can't just talk about all these properties or tropes or whatever, because we haven't perceived those things. I mean, we can conceptualize about those things, but we can't perceive them. So that's kind of interesting there. So I'll get more into like my views on that. So I also I took a class called 2 classes I took. One was 19th century continental philosophy, and one was phenomenology and existentialism. And I think back in 2011 is when I took that class, and I still love phenomenology, and I still have a love for phenomenology that is like I just have loved it for years. I still love it. So that kind of got me. Those 2 classes kind of got me more into continental philosophy more than analytic, but because that's I love both sides, but that's kind of what got me into Husserl, Sartre, Heidegger, and then I kind of moved beyond the whole phenomenology existentialism thing, and I kind of looked into I started reading people like Derrida and Foucault, and a lot of others like him. And then even later on, beyond that, I started reading Gilles Deleuze and people like that. And now I don't. I mean, now I agree with phenomenology, and I hold some of those views. Other than the ego that they posit, that the ego that phenomenology posits is not something that I agree with. So I never took a class with Derrida, Foucault, or Deleuze, but I read that, and I got into that thing myself. So going back to ethics, where am I now with ethics? Right now, I have kind of abandoned the whole deontology thing, because I don't. Because when I was in the whole metaphysics thing, I did agree that there were objective, abstract entities, and I no longer believe that. I no longer think that. But I am really into virtue ethics now, and I think that virtue ethics is about character. It's about virtues. It's about being a good person, and we know how to do that. We know what virtue is. And we don't and that doesn't mean that there's a objective entity somewhere that we can't see. So I do agree with virtue ethics. If you want me to expound on any of these views, then you can just tell me below and I will. This is just like a quick little video about my little philosophical development. But okay, so about epistemology. I first started that I read Arthur Schopenhauer and his World as Will and Representation, and I also read Kant, and I read Fichte, and I read Hegel, and I read Berkeley, and I was big on idealism. I thought that idealism was the best theory ever. And if you go back to my 2010, 2011 videos, I made a lot of videos arguing some sort of idealism. I don't really think that anymore. I don't really think that. I guess what my thought about the whole thing is sort of a phenomenological realism, but I'm kind of more about the phenomenology now. I've been all about the phenomenology and about deconstruction and about Gilles Deleuze for the past year now. But I've been about phenomenology for the last few years, and that's kind of where I stand when it comes to like a continental idea of epistemology, and the analytic idea of epistemology between coherentism, foundationalism, infinitism, and externalism and internalism. I would say that I'm either a coherentist and internalist or an infinitist and internalist. I think I've made videos about that stuff recently, so if you want to do that, you can go into my epistemology playlist, and I discuss those views a little bit. So, having to do with philosophy of science, I got into that when I took a class called Philosophy of Religion, with the chair of the philosophy department at UNO. His name is Andrew Newman, and he this was in 2013, like 3 years ago, and he let me borrow a book of his. Actually, it was this book is what he let me borrow. I eventually gave the book back to him and bought my own, but he let me borrow this book, and I read it, and I read it pretty much cover to cover, and then I got into philosophy of science, and I bought tons of other books on it, and I kind of have my own little theory of verisimilitude that I want to make that I want to write about and talk about here more. But that's kind of cool though, and I also kind of got to philosophy of science through epistemology, because logical positivism is philosophy of science basically, and that's kind of where I got to it. When it comes to philosophy of science, I agree with Sir Karl Popper. That's kind of where I'm at there. So that's kind of has been my philosophical development, and I read new things all the time. Like, I read new theories and I think about them, and I kind of develop every day pretty much. So let me know about your philosophical development, please. I would love to hear about that and talk about that, or if you want me to explain more of one little part of that of my philosophical development, or why I think or argue a certain thing, I will gladly do another video just discussing that. So thank you for watching.